All right, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our Land Use Committee meeting for Monday, July 30th, 2018. I'm Katie Tang, chair of this committee. To my left is Supervisor Asha Safai, and I believe that Supervisor Kim will join us in a bit. Our clerk is Erica Major, and from SFGov TV, we'd like to thank Jesse Larson and Jim Smith. Madam Clerk, are there any announcements?
Yes, please make sure to silence all cell phones and electronic devices. Completed speaker cards and copies of any documents to be included as part of a file should be submitted to the clerk. Items acted upon today will appear on the September 4th Board of Supervisors agenda unless otherwise stated.
Thank you very much. Can you please call item 1?
Yes, item number 1 is an ordinance amending the planning code to conditionally permit massage establishments in the Union Street Neighborhood Commercial District and affirming appropriate findings.
Thank you. And this was an item sponsored by Supervisor Stephanie, who was here last week. I believe we had just continued it because of amendments. We have Jack Gallagher here from her office.
Thank you, Chair Tang. Jack Gallagher with Supervisor Catherine Stephanie's office. We made 2 amendments last week that needed to be continued to today. Other than that, we don't have any other changes to the ordinance, and we would like to have your support.
All right. Thank you very much, Mr. Gallagher. I don't see any questions or comments here, so any members of the public who wish to speak on item number 1, please come on up. Item 1, public comment.
I'm here, peace in the Middle East. I'm here speaking on and not really supporting or not supporting, but on the issue of the Union Street Neighborhood Commercial District. As y'all may know, I come up here speak regularly, and my specific issues are what's happening in the Fillmore. All of these districts and all of these programs has been played upon in my community for a number of years. It seems like they always put things in the Western Addition, and it fails miserably. And now they put it off in the rest of the city, see if it's going to work. See, they come to the Fillmore, and then they know that all the failed efforts start in the Fillmore, so you could get away with whatever you're doing in the Fillmore. And Supervisor Safai, I definitely want to talk to you because I read an article. And I know you're not supposed to direct it at the supervisors.
That's right.
Okay, I'm sorry, so I won't do that. But I also came here to make notice because I read in the paper about, it says something about some shady or shafty leadership in our community about housing. Oh, listen, my mind recollected. I went back in my archives and I said, wait a minute. Now I know where I know a certain supervisor from. Was on the Housing Authority Commission, a failed commission that failed our whole community, the black community. So we're going to have to sit down and talk because some things that we're going to have to talk about, my brother and others that's been on that
Mr.
commission.
Washington, we keep the comments at Union Street.
Okay, I just want to let everybody know, because, you know, I'm like Trump. I started this station here, the PEG, the community station.
All right, Mr. Washington, I'm sorry. I'm going to have to cut you off here because this is about the Union Street.
Okay, so
NCD,
you're taking up my time, Supervisor. I know you're lame ducking you out of here, but I know the rules, so you need to stop it because you stopped me. Hold up. Stop the time.
No, I'm sorry. The time has to stop because this is about the Union Street
I'm talking
NCD
about to give me a chance to say about
and the
that.
massage establishment. Okay?
I'm talking
I heard
about
it at the
that.
beginning, but now you are not stopping. So.
Okay, it's 4 seconds.
All right.
So start it. I'm here talking about it, but it's a parallel. What's going on in the city by the bay? Oh my God.
All right, thank you. Any members of the public who wish to comment on item number 1, please come on up. Okay, public comment is closed. All right, colleague, can we get a motion on item number 1 to send this forward to the full board with positive recommendation?
I'd like to make a motion to send this out of committee with full recommendation to the full
All right,
board.
with positive recommendation. Thank you. We'll do that without objection with Supervisor Kim absent. All right, Madam Clerk, can you please call item number 2?
Yes, item number 2 is a hearing to review the 6-month report conducted by the Planning Department for the interim zoning controls for conditional use for restaurants and storefront mergers in the Mission Interim Controls Area, enacted by Resolution number 618 and requesting the Planning Department to report.
Thank you very much. I see Mr. Diego Sanchez here from Planning Department. I don't know if Supervisor Ronan's staff were going to come. No, okay. Great. Thank you, Mr. Sanchez.
Definitely. Supervisor Diego Sanchez with the Planning Department. Today I want to provide a report on the efforts related to the interim controls in place since January of this year in the Mission District. First, some background. The interim controls require conditional use authorization from the Planning Commission for two things. One, any new restaurant use serving alcohol, or two, a proposed commercial storefront merger resulting in a commercial use space 2,000 gross square feet or greater. These controls are in place for the area generally bounded by Cesar Chavez Street, Potrero Avenue, Division Street, and Mission Street. The interim controls note that a rapid increase in the number of restaurants serving alcohol in the Mission neighborhood may crowd out other neighborhood serving uses. This would adversely affect the existing cultural and economic diversity of the neighborhood. The interim controls also note that smaller sized commercial spaces can be leased at lower rates due to their size and are found in the neighborhood's retail corridors. Losing these would be detrimental as well to the existing cultural and economic diversity of the neighborhood. So to address these concerns, the Planning Department, along with OEWD, MOHCD, Supervisor Ronan's office, and community stakeholders have been working to generate land use controls as a response. As part of the effort, the following groups have been engaged in talks about a possible set of land use controls, and these include the Brewers Guild, SF Made, Golden Gate Restaurant Association, the Northeast Mission Business Association, Mission Merchants, Central Mission Neighborhood Association, Calle 24, Mission Dolores Neighborhood Association, United to Save the Mission, HOMI. There have been in-person visits with Mission Street merchants. We've reached out to the Eastern Neighborhood, CAC, and in April we also held a general community meeting at the Women's Building. So all of this has helped inform a set of land use controls that will do the following four things. One, they will carefully regulate the concentration of restaurants and alcohol dispensing uses. Two, they'll preserve existing and promote the creation of new, smaller size storefronts. Three, they'll help protect long-standing and character-defining legacy businesses. And four, they will allow for nonprofit office uses at upper stories along the Mission Street corridor. So it's anticipated that the final version of these land use controls will be introduced very shortly. So this concludes my presentation, and I'm here for questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that overview. Supervisor Safai.
Sorry, if you could come back up. Sorry, I couldn't really hear everything that was said. But so you're going from the interim controls, you did the studies outreach, met with community stakeholders, and now there's going to be a proposed set of permanent controls?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Any members of the public who wish to comment on item 2, please come on up. Any members? Okay, seeing none, public comment is closed for item 2. All right, so thank you for that overview. And colleague, can we get a motion on this? Oh, wait, this is a hearing. So I think, I don't know if the sponsor wanted to just file the hearing, if that was relayed to you. I don't know that it was relayed to our office.
I understand that they would need to accept the report in this. I'd probably defer to the city attorney.
No, I think it's just a hearing.
Once the report is heard, it just needs to be filed.
Yeah.
So we've already.
So we'll make a motion
All
to
right.
file the report.
Okay, great. So motion to file the hearing and the report. So we'll do that without objection. Thank you very much. Item 3, please.
Item number 3 is an ordinance amending the planning code by abolishing a 9-foot legislated setback on the west side of 19th Avenue between Quintara Street and Rivera Street, and revising the zoning map to rezone from RH1 to RM2 and to rezone from RH2 to RM2, and affirming appropriate findings.
Thank you very much. So I'll kick off this item, given that I'm the sponsor of this legislation. We had spoken with some project sponsors who wanted to create housing on the corner of 19th Avenue and Quintara in our district, which is right along a transit corridor, a state highway, and I believe that it is such a prime location for affordable housing there. One of the challenges that the project sponsor has had, and in which might may or may not prohibit them from being able to utilize Home SF, our local density bonus program, is a legislative setback. This is a really interesting case because I think that between the city attorney's office and other staff as well at planning, looking into the history and how it is that we're supposed to change this legislative setback was very interesting. I will note that it is my understanding that there are many inconsistencies in terms of legislative setbacks, especially on the west side of town. And for me, what I would really like to achieve out of this, despite some of the reservations I heard at Planning Commission and from the staff report, is for us to be able to proceed with this amendment so that potentially this project sponsor will be more incentivized and interested in using Home SF to build more affordable housing here on this particular corner, or where they're going to be merging together several parcels. So with that said, I would like to bring up, I think, Mr. Aaron Starr from Planning Department and share their perspective on this.
Thank you, Supervisor Tang. Aaron Starr, Manager of Legislative Affairs at the Planning Department. The Planning Commission heard this last week on July 26th. During the hearing, some new information was revealed about a bulb out along 19th Avenue. The staff's recommendation was to approve the ordinance with a modification to not remove the 9-foot setback. This was in order to help protect the pedestrian realm a bit. During the hearing, we couldn't verify one way or another if the bulb out was actually going to be approved, but we did get confirmation from SMTA that it will be. So the Commission's recommendation then is to approve the ordinance without modification, so as is, and this is because we did confirm that the long bulb out would be in front of it. And that concludes my presentation.
Wonderful, that's great to hear. All right, and as you all know, it's very rare for us to be able to potentially even get more housing on the west side, and especially on a transit corridor, so we wanted to at least preserve that option. All right, any members of the public who wish to comment on item 3, please come on up.
Eileen Bogan with Speak, here on my own behalf. I'm requesting a continuance on this item. The legislation includes rezoning and setback amendments, which are not part of the proposed project area, particularly Lot 33 at 2121 19th Avenue and Lot 31 at 2145 19th Avenue. The current zoning is inconsistent with the current uses. In the executive summary on page 8 under public comment, it states that there were no comments received. The report has not been updated to reflect the comments that were submitted. Those comments have yet to be responded to in the environmental document. Caltrans District 4 has been contacted about the bulb out. The response from Caltrans is inconsistent with the comments made at the Planning Commission. The assessor's records indicate a name which also appears on federal documents. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other members of the public who wish to comment on item 3? Okay, seeing none, public comment is closed. And I will just note that this legislation is, again, to try to incentivize the utilization of Home SF. However, there's still quite a bit of a lengthy process that if the project sponsor were even to pursue housing here, that they would need to go through and engage with the community in terms of what their project would look like, and have that dialogue with our neighbors. So this is, again, just to set up a potential situation, but there's still a lot of work ahead to be done with our neighbors. Okay, so with that said, any other questions or comments on this one?
No.
Supervisor Safai?
I did want to just say that we have a few of these in my district as well, and it's a little bit unclear exactly what they exist for. In this situation, it seems pretty clear that there might have been a reason for pedestrian safety, and I do appreciate the comments of the public speaker, but in this instance, we have a really viable spot that potentially would be for dense development, which is what we're trying to encourage along transit corridors. So, thank you.
All right. Thank you, Supervisor Safai. So with that said, can we get a motion on item 3 to send forth to the full board with positive recommendation?
Right. So I make that motion.
All right. We'll do that without objection.
As a committee report?
Oh, I'm sorry. And as a committee report. I apologize. Thank you. All right. Madam Clerk, item 4, please.
Item number 4 is an ordinance amending the planning code to allow payment of an in lieu fee for an ADU street tree requirement and affirming appropriate findings.
Thank you very much. So this is another one of our items, and we had already gone over the ADU legislation at the full board, but had just severed out the portion regarding the street tree planting requirement because of a notification issue or noticing issue at Land Use Committee. But that was the only reason why, and so the only portion before us today is that piece. I don't know if you had any comments, Supervisor Safai.
Well, I did in general. I mean, I know we've had this conversation. I know you and I unfortunately can't have conversation about it because we send the committee, but we've tried to have some dialogue publicly. I am, having worked at the Bureau of Urban Forestry, I am a big proponent of planting trees, as I know you are. But this conversation centers around facilitating the ability of these to come online as quickly as possible to deal with our housing crisis, correct? And so the idea is whatever way facilitates the ability of the ADU process to move forward. I will say, and we did have this conversation on the record, that doing the in lieu fee is more expensive than actually planting the tree. So I would encourage the public and those project sponsors to take advantage of the opportunity to plant those trees. But know that if you do pay the in lieu fee, we still as a city have the ability to come back and plant that tree where in that location as long as it's permissible based on the undergrounding. I did ask the fire marshal to come today. I wanted to have a conversation with them in general about the process. Is that okay?
Is there a fire marshal? Oh,
yeah.
Yes.
Great. And for the record, we are going to be duplicating the overall ADU file tomorrow at the full board, and we'll be sending that back here to this committee and then over to the Planning Commission to have a further conversation in general about ADUs and new construction. We did talk about it at the Rules Committee and with some of the commissioners, their desire to further that conversation. So, Mr. Starr, we will be sending the file back to this committee and then making amendments to send it back to the Planning Commission for further conversation. But thank you, Mr. Fire Marshal, for coming today. Wanted to have a conversation about, we have heard some general, and I did convey this to you, some general concerns from project sponsors. And if you can speak a little bit about the fire code as it pertains to single-family homes versus multi-unit properties and what the difference is.
So with regards, first of all, Dan DeCosio, Fire Marshal. Good afternoon, Supervisors. Happy to be here. That's a good point to make it that designation where you have differentiate between an R3, which is single-family or two dwelling units, or a multi-family dwelling unit, which is 3 or more units, which is more like an apartment building. So if it's an R3, single-family dwelling unit, and you're adding or proposing an ADU for your home, an in-law unit, let's say, that does not fall into the jurisdiction of the state fire marshal. My role and my job as fire marshal.
Excuse me. So what does that mean in terms of the ability to add that ADU? I mean, are we talking about sprinklers, or what are we in particular talking about?
So that falls under building department jurisdiction, 100%. If it's a single-family dwelling or 2 units or less, or fewer, I should say, building department jurisdiction. Once you become a 3-unit or more building, greater, now you become an R2, multifamily dwelling unit, an apartment building, a condo complex, etc. That now falls under the jurisdiction of the state fire marshal. As such, the state codes, as adopted by the state fire marshal, are enforced for that application.
And so what does that mean in the instance of multi-unit properties? Because we've heard differing things from project sponsors and others in the field as it relates to fire rating and egress, as it relates to sprinkler systems. And so what does that mean in your regard, in your discretion, as it pertains to...
I think the main difference there is sprinkling requirement. That's the main difference. So if you're an R3, there's been an interpretation, it's actually an information sheet the State Fire Marshal put out. If you are an R3, if you are 2 or fewer units and you add 1 ADU and your building is not sprinklered at the time, you do not have to add sprinklers for the new ADU. That does not apply to apartment buildings. For apartment buildings, if you add an ADU, you have to, and there's FS 05, which we signed on with the building department, sprinklers are required for that new unit and the egress path out to the public way.
But not for the entire building?
Not for the entire building. Again, with our FS05, I welcome anyone watching this to go online and on the building department and look up FS05, and it outlines the requirements. To what extent do you sprinkler a building when you're adding an ADU? And it's all spelled out there.
Well, that's good, because I think if you had to sprinkler the whole building, we wouldn't be getting any ADUs for sure. Because then you'd be talking about displacing existing residents, and so that would be a major impediment. But just talk me through an example. I know it's kind of hypothetical, but in the instance that Supervisor Tang has put forward, so you have decks and the cantilevered portions of a property, and we're able to go and add that. If there's, in that instance, you have to have two forms of egress?
So
if you just have one, okay, I'm sorry.
what we're seeing, and again, this is prescribed in the code. I'd like to make a quick point here. Earlier, I was sitting here and taking this all in with, we're amending the planning code, and you have that authority to do that as this board, this body. The fire code's a state code, and so is the building code. And as the local jurisdiction, we do not have the authority to waive state requirements on building and fire code requirements. So I think that's very important for all of us to understand that. And the other thing to understand is those codes and those requirements are there for the safety of the occupants of the building and for firefighters responding to the building. And those codes have been developed over decades at great loss of life at some times. And so they're there for a reason. So we cannot be less restrictive than what's prescribed in the California Building and Fire Code for fire and life safety. Setting that aside, with that understanding, I should say, there are times where you cannot meet the letter of the code. It just physically is not possible. If you're landlocked, if you have zero lot line setbacks, et cetera, we as the local authority can come up with equivalencies, offsetting measures, enhancements that mitigate that deficiency in that design, and therefore, in our opinion, rise to the level where it's equally as safe as it would have been as prescribed. So with getting to your point on our biggest challenge is when the applicant wants to utilize the single exit exception in the code. And the code says that for an applicant, for a designer to utilize a single exit exception, the building has to be fully sprinklered. That's state code. We cannot be less restrictive than that. So what do we do? Well, we've come up, the fire department, I put a team together with the two captains, a lieutenant, and a fire protection engineer. We've a little think tank together, offsetting measures, equivalencies. What can we do in lieu of sprinkling the whole building? Well, maybe we sprinkle just the ground floor. We do a 1 hour separation. We have a 1 hour
separation of fire rated door.
A horizontal 1 hour separation and a passageway 1 hour separation. Things like that, we're trying to think outside the box, come up with alternatives, and to not just say, no, you can't build this, but some solutions that we feel increases the safety of the building to where we are as safe as if you went to the letter of the code.
Since you put this working group together, have you seen project sponsors utilize some of the suggestions that you have?
Yes, we have. And just as recently as last week, we have about 60, if my memory serves me correctly, 60 ADUs in the queue, in the bin, waiting for our review.
Just 60?
61, I think it is. The process is it comes in through planning, starts at planning, and that's where we need to get in early on this. If you're going to use a single exit exception, maybe you bring in fire in early to have that discussion before you get way down the road. Anyway, it starts at planning, then it goes to building, and then it's routed to fire. So we get it late in the game. Sometimes where you're way down this path, a lot of money is sunk into the design, et cetera, and then I think as an owner, you're caught off guard thinking, wait a minute, this is just not feasible, and we need to get in earlier in the process. But to my point I was trying to make earlier, we put a team together. We did a sampling of it was either 12 or 13 ADUs last week. And the biggest challenge with those 12 to 13 were the single exits. And with our draft proposal, which I've welcomed and I was hoping to bring the building department on board. I'd like the building department to have input on it as well. I think if we have both departments sign off on equivalencies, offsetting measures, alternatives, let's say, I think it not only expedites the matter, it increases the safety for all. So Oh, go ahead, I'm sorry.
So,
Is it okay if I jump in really quick? Sorry,
sure,
just because you just mentioned this one point about trying to get both fire and DBI to sign off on,
Yes.
I guess, a policy that both departments can live with. And again, none of us are asking for any departments to relax any sort of standards, especially when it comes to life and safety. Absolutely not. But I think what we are hearing is just project sponsors hearing different things from different departments at different parts of the process. And so last I heard, there still hasn't been that sort of sign off from both fire and DBI. What is the holdup at this point?
So the way it typically works, plan and intake, you go through planning, intake through DBI, building department to fire. We look at the plan, we review it. Do you meet the prescribed code? We make our comments. No, you do not. It goes back to the designer. You do not meet it. The designer comes back and says, okay, how about if we implement this or add this to our design? Will that offset? Those equivalencies are the responsibility of coming up with solutions is on the designer typically. We're doing this a little bit backwards, given that this is a priority of the city, that we want to partner with other agencies within the city, and we're on board with affordable housing, but we want safe affordable housing. We've jumped ahead and came up with these equivalencies on our own that we would accept. But to your point, Supervisor, those are only as good as if both sides aren't on board with that, it doesn't do us any good.
Right.
So if it's good for fire and it's not good for building, we're still at an impasse. That's why we've been asking and wanting to meet with building to come together, to come up with a document together that we can all sign off on for consistency and to expedite the review process.
So what I'm going to ask for when we duplicate the file tomorrow and send it back here to make amendments, I'm going to ask that when it goes to planning, that you all have the ability to put together those recommendations and working groups, so by the time that it comes back, that you all will have a plan implementable. Because my understanding is, you say there's 61 in the queue. I understand from the report that there's the potential to impact hundreds and hundreds of these ADUs. So they're coming down the queue, and so we've heard this equivalency conversation, we've heard the fire rating conversation, the single point of exit, the ability. So there's a lot of different things that you all are already starting to think about, and we don't want to discourage project sponsors in these units out of the gate. So it would be good, since we're going to have this opportunity, because we're going to have the conversation about new construction, ADUs and new construction, which I think is obviously the easiest situation, because then you build into the plans all of the different things that are needed. That's a lot easier situation to deal with than dealing with an existing building with regarding exiting and fire rating and sprinklering and so on.
Agreed.
So we'll probably ask you then by that time to come back with the final, so you all have come to some conclusion when we have the next committee hearing.
Be happy to do that.
Thank you for coming today on short notice. I appreciate it. Supervisor Chair Tang, do you have any additional questions?
No, thank you. I think a lot has been said when we first considered the bigger package of the legislation. I think really we're just trying to figure out where are the hiccups that project sponsors have in terms of trying to navigate all the different city agencies. I hear kind of reports back from the working groups, but I think what's still unresolved is that piece where fire and DBI are in alignment with each other, and again, without relaxing any of the life and safety requirements for anyone. Right. So yes, I think as Supervisor Safai said, we'd love to, whenever it's next before us, to see if there's a resolution on that front.
Excellent. We look forward to it. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
And I would just add, I just appreciate the fact that you say for the record that you understand that this is a priority for the city, and you all are trying to adjust and work your staff into a position to be able to facilitate these with the respect to health and safety. That's very important. I just want, through the chair, I wanted to ask Aaron Starr from Planning to come back up. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. DeCosio. So I just heard from the fire marshal that oftentimes they're getting the plans, they route through you, they go to building, and then they're coming to fire, and sometimes the single point of exit is becoming a problem. Is there any way that planning could help to facilitate bringing, since it seems as though fire marshal needs to weigh in on some of these issues earlier, is there a way that we can bring them in earlier into the process? Is that possible?
I believe there is. It's not really up to planning, though. We're just one review agency in the process, and DBI is the controller of that process. So,
But when we have the conversation about, when we had the conversation recently about pop-outs and neighborhood notification and mandatory pre-applications, I mean, do these ADUs, do they go through a pre-application hearing when they're sitting down with the relevant department? I see someone on your staff.
I'm going to let Marcel. She's much more versed.
Thank you.
Hi, thank you. Marcel Boudreau. I manage the ADU program for the planning department. And I just wanted to comment briefly on the combined pre-application meeting component of Supervisor Tang's legislation that I believe has been carved out, maybe duplicated. But it's a conversation that we've been having amongst the different agencies that have evolved out of our working
I'm sorry,
groups.
excuse me.
Sure.
Chair Tang, is there a mandatory coordinate? Can you repeat what you just said?
Sure. DBI hosts currently a pre-application meeting between DBI and Fire, starting, I believe, with our working groups, and I believe Supervisor Tang has introduced this through some of her ADU legislation. There is the idea of inviting planning to these meetings.
So I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you, but what I just heard the fire marshal say was that they're brought in late sometimes into the conversation. So that seems different what you just said.
Sure, that is correct. That is current scenario. What we are talking about is inviting planning to these pre-application meetings between DBI and Fire so that the three agencies would be together at the outset, before filing. So
Is that part of
And
your
that was
legislation?
part of the legislation,
Right.
yes.
Okay, good. So that's what I was going to say. Wanted to make sure that's because it didn't sound like it's still happening yet.
So that is a ongoing conversation we're having, developing a screening process as well as inviting planning into the DBI procedure.
Well, it sounds like it's now going to be required when we finalize this at the board, right? So hopefully you all have a system in place ready to go.
We are currently working on the final touches of that.
Great.
Thank you.
Perfect.
Thank you, Ms. Boudreau. And we are now joined by Supervisor Kim as well. And I think Supervisor Kim had some comments or questions.
Sure, I was happy to make them before or after public comment, but I do again want to thank Chair Tang for all of your work on how we can ease the procedure and process for our property owners to build accessory dwelling units, which we know is one of the most efficient and more affordable ways to increase housing and density here in San Francisco, but also throughout the Bay Area. And I think when we first worked on both legalizing and allowing new accessory dwelling units. Over the last couple of years, we found that many homeowners were having trouble moving through planning, fire, and DBI. And the complaint I often heard was that the same architect would offer two accessory dwelling units, often very similar. One would get accepted and one would get rejected, and how we could work on developing a more streamlined process for both the design process, and I think that this will take us further along, and I appreciate all of the listening sessions that Supervisor Tang has hosted throughout the city so that we could figure out how to ease this process for many of our homeowners. I just have to say, and I did not state this at land use when this was originally with us, that I don't support the in-lieu fee. I actually support the ordinance as it was originally stated, which just got rid of the tree requirement in order to build an accessory dwelling unit. I just worry about adding another requirement to homeowners that just want to build an additional unit that will be out on our rental market. We already have a number of restrictions on the ADU, that it's rent controlled, that we protect our tenants, all really, really important things. And so I would prefer the ordinance as it was originally authored, with just taking out the requirement to plant a tree, and also not support this in lieu fee.
Okay, thank you, Supervisor Kim. And of course, I originally supported that as well, but tried to strike a compromise with folks who wanted to have a tree planted by the city, but also understanding, and I stated this previously, even having my own landlord deal with this very issue around having the siting of the tree done on the property when he wanted to create an ADU, and running into issues and time delays there. So I appreciate that. Supervisor Kim, I don't know if you're planning to make a motion to amend, or you just wanted to state that.
Well, I guess, we're in Land Use Committee, and I see Supervisor Safai shaking his head no. So I'm not going to push this issue. I'll just ask for a roll call on this item then, and because it's specifically on the in lieu fee, and I will be voting against it at the full board. But I just think that we need to be making this process as easy as possible. And there are certain things that I think that this board has stated that is a bottom line for us. And I think rent control and tenant protections was one of them, along, of course, with safety. And for me, this is just does not meet that criteria when we have a housing crisis. I think that we should be making it as easy as possible as we can for homeowners to build these accessory dwelling units. So I'll just be voting against this portion of the planning code today.
Okay, and perhaps I could ask Deputy City Attorney, because this particular item before us today is just on the tree requirement. Would Supervisor Kim need to vote against the entire item, or I don't know if there's a way to sever it out. I think it's just the entire item. Okay.
Yeah, that's the only piece remaining. So you would be voting no on the motion to send it to the full board.
Okay. All right. So any other questions, comments? Okay. I know there's a lot more ongoing work on this effort between the various city departments, so thank you for that. Any public comment on item 4? Please come on up. Any members of the public? Okay. Seeing none, public comment is closed. So, Madam Clerk, can we get a roll call vote on item 4, please? And I believe this item is supposed to be sent out as a committee report as well. So,
first we have to make a motion on it, don't we?
yes, can someone make a motion?
Make a motion to send to the full board with positive recommendation.
Okay.
And then you want to do
Roll
a
call vote, please.
On the motion to send this matter forward as recommended as a committee report, Supervisor Safai?
Aye.
Safai, aye. Supervisor Kim? Kim, no. Supervisor Tang?
Aye.
Tang, aye. There are 2 ayes and 1 no, with Supervisor Kim in dissent.
All right. Thank you very much. Item 5, please.
Item number 5 is an ordinance amending the planning code to permit affordable housing on undeveloped lots in service, arts, light, industrial zoning districts, and affirming appropriate findings.
Thank you. I'm going to turn it over to Supervisor Kim, the sponsor of this item.
Thank you so much, Chair Tang. This item came to my office initially when the Tipping Point Foundation had identified a site, a parking lot that was underutilized by which they could potentially build 100% affordable housing for formerly homeless. What this ordinance does is that it adds one additional use to parcels zone Sally in the south of Market, as long as there are no habitable structures on that parcel currently, and that is to build 100% affordable housing only. Sally is a very important zoning in the district that I represent because in many ways it protects arts, manufacturing, repair, the types of jobs and uses that we want to continue to preserve in the South of Market, which is what the South of Market was originally known to be a neighborhood for. But as the South of Market has grown rapidly with both office and residential, it has become more important than ever for us to preserve areas that are zoned PDR and Sally. However, we also know that 100% affordable housing and addressing our homelessness crisis is also of great priority for our city, and that this land is often slightly more affordable simply because of the uses that are allowed on these sites. This simple change will add one additional use to Sally parcels. In the Western Soma planning area, special SUD, and that is to build 100% affordable housing as well. So colleagues, love to ask for your support on this item, and I believe, yes, that we have a representative from the planning department to say a few words about this ordinance as well as some, requested recommendations from the Planning Commission and staff.
Good afternoon, Supervisors. Aaron Starr, Manager of Legislative Affairs for the Planning Department. The Planning Commission heard this item on July 12th and voted unanimously to approve with modifications. The proposed modifications are 1, to retain the original height and bulk districts for eligible parcels, 2, to remove the term habitable and replace it with clarifying language, and 3, clarify that surface parking lots eligible for 100% affordable housing projects may be permitted or unpermitted parking lots. And that concludes my presentation, but I'm happy to answer questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I do support these amendments and also understand the importance of permitted and unpermitted, as a number of these parking lots are not necessarily permitted. So that distinction, I think, was very important to include. I have no further comments or questions on this item. So, Madam Chair, if we can open it for public comment.
Great, thank you. Any members of the public who wish to speak on item 5, please come on up.
Good afternoon, members of committee. Peter Cohen from Council of Community Housing Organizations, here to strongly support the legislation. Just a little preamble is the need for affordable housing continues to get more acute. A lot of us in the advocacy community have been trying to put our thinking caps on of increasingly creative ways to come up with opportunities for affordable housing in a very hot and competitive real estate market. And of course, the discussion about funding kind of tends to consume a lot of our policy and political conversations. But the other essential ingredient in affordable housing development is land, sites. And I think we tend to forget about that or take it for granted. And we have ended up many times over the years in a cash-rich, land-poor situation. So land banking and being creative and proactive is really critical. This is a very simple piece of legislation, as you heard from staff and from Supervisor Kim as a sponsor. I think in a really nice way, we've come together with the Housing Accelerator Fund and with Tipping Point in really kind of coming up with this creative tool. And I want to give particular credit to Sophie Hayward, who, good for us in the advocacy community, has now brought all of her sharp skills out into the nonprofit advocacy world and worked to do a lot of the real creative thinking. But this came together in a nice way. It maybe even be a bit of a template tool that we can think about applying in other targeted geographies of the city. The conditions obviously are not Sally, but the idea of being able to have an overlay that particularly prioritizes affordable housing is something we might be able to replicate. So again, strongly support. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next speaker, please.
Hi, supervisors. Good afternoon. My name is Rebecca Foster, and I'm here on behalf of the San Francisco Housing Accelerator Fund, where I'm the executive director, and also Tipping Point Community. And as you know, Tipping Point is a grant-making organization aimed to break the cycle of poverty in the Bay Area, and the Housing Accelerator Fund is a nonprofit fund dedicated to accelerating the production and preservation of affordable housing. And we've joined together along with staff and as Peter mentioned, working with Peter and Sophie Hayward's great work to pilot a model to build much needed supportive housing for homeless individuals using all philanthropic dollars rather than city gap financing. And really with the idea that this housing is additive to the city's pipeline. And so with that in mind, are very supportive of the proposed legislation based on the experience we've had, the really challenging experience we've had over the last year trying to secure a site on which to build this first prototype affordable housing project. And I think just, put simply, we've learned what everyone is painfully aware of, that buying land in San Francisco is incredibly expensive, and there's a lot of competition in negotiating a purchase. Particularly, we've looked at a site in Supervisor Kim's district in the Sally zoning, a surface parking lot that looked really promising for a project last year, and we were not able to. Housing wasn't included in the zoning. So we think this is a small but very meaningful step towards making it more possible to do projects like this. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next speaker, please.
Good afternoon, Supervisors. Corey Smith on behalf of the Housing Action Coalition, absolutely in support here today. And I also just kind of wanted to touch, if I could get the overhead, please. This is a map of San Francisco, perhaps, surface level parking lots, 25,000 square feet or more. Overhead, maybe? It's the tricky part where you have to press the power button in order to get anything to turn on. Somewhere here, there we go. All of the 25,000 or larger parking lots in the city of San Francisco. We've been working with an individual that has accumulated a lot of planning data and a lot of opportunity site data. So I think this would be a good place to build a lot of affordable housing because it's pretty underutilized given what we are doing right now, and obviously happy to help and facilitate in whatever way we can. As far as the legislation, absolutely supportive. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other members of the public who wish to comment on item 5? Okay, seeing none, public comment is closed. Supervisor Kim?
Thank you so much. And I just had one question for staff, and I just wanted to make sure, because I was reading through the ordinance, if we further define habitable. Was that change already made?
I believe the amendments that I saw just took that out and referred to kiosks and things on parking lots.
Can you point out where it is? Sorry, I was just looking for that change, that particular change.
I'm going to have to
just want to
bring
make
that.
sure that it was included today.
Maybe
I saw the permitted and unpermitted was taken out, so that was clarified.
Supervisor Kim, Deputy City Attorney John Givner. I think it's page 6 in the table where we're around line 18 would remove habitable buildings and replace it with structures.
Okay. Around 18.
Does that match up with what you have? Yeah.
It says on page line about 15 through 17, affordable housing projects are principally permitted in this district on any undeveloped parcel containing no existing habitable buildings as of the effective date of this ordinance. So I saw that it was still in there. I do see that permitted is taken out and it just says surface parking lot, so that there's no distinction between parking lots that are permitted and unpermitted. And I saw the first recommendation also, I believe, was included in terms of keeping the heights consistent. But it does look like habitable is still in the language of the ordinance. And perhaps planning was okay with that being in there.
In the version that we gave to her office. So in a draft with the amendments that we sent to your office just before this meeting,
Oh, okay.
we replaced habitable buildings with structures on that line.
Okay, great. Do I have to make that amendment then in committee? I do.
Yes.
Okay, great. My apologies. So, so I'll make that motion to amend to take out on line 17 of page 6, habitable buildings, and to replace that with no existing structures.
And so just to confirm, Supervisor, you're moving to adopt all of the Planning Commission's recommendations, including that change in on page 6?
Yes. But it looks like the permitted and unpermitted change is already in this ordinance. So I'm a little confused. You know, well, can we continue this and go to item
Continue
number
to this
6? My apologies.
We'll continue this item till later in the meeting, and we'll go to item 6 then. We have a new clerk.
Agenda item number 6 is an ordinance amending the Public Works Code to repeal the Reclaimed Water Use Ordinance and affirming the appropriate findings.
Thank you very much. And we have Steve Ritchie here from the PUC.
Thank you, committee members. If I could have the slides, please. Yes, I'm here to talk about the recycled water ordinance and how things have evolved relative to recycled water in San Francisco and elsewhere. The recycled water ordinance has been in effect since 1991 and is applicable to new and remodeled buildings over 40,000 square feet and new and existing irrigation over 10,000 square feet, and has designated recycled water use areas where a required installation of dual plumbing exists. Those are the purple areas noted on the map there on the screen. But planning for recycled water has evolved. It's driven in part by geographical differences. The west side has large parks and golf courses, large irrigated areas that are great uses for non-potable water. The east side has newer and more dense urban developments and more opportunity for indoor non-potable uses as opposed to irrigation. In traditional water supply planning, we would come up with centralized recycled water facilities, one on the west side, one on the east side, to produce recycled water for these non-potable purposes. On the west side of San Francisco, we're making progress in irrigating our parks and golf courses, such as Sharp Park, actually in Pacifica, in partnership with the North Coast County Water District. We are delivering recycled water to the Sharp Park Golf Course, which is owned by San Francisco and hence is a customer of ours. In Harding Park, we're in partnership with Daly City, using their infrastructure to serve Harding and Fleming golf courses with recycled water for irrigation since about 2012. And now we're under construction for the West Side Enhanced Water Recycling Project, which is being constructed at the Oceanside plant. It will serve recycled water for irrigation of Golden Gate Park, Lincoln Park Golf Course, and the Presidio, and potential future use at other locations with high demand, such as the San Francisco Zoo. On the east side, things have changed. Decentralized non-potable water systems are now required on the east side. Since 2015, the non-potable water ordinance requires new development projects of 250,000 gross square feet or greater to meet their own non-potable demands for toilet flushing and irrigation on site. And that's applicable citywide, but it really focuses on the east side. So we're really looking at kind of a two-pronged approach for meeting San Francisco's non-potable demands. The west side would have a centralized facility to deliver recycled water to large irrigation areas, and on the east side, we would have distributed systems in effect that would serve each of those developments and not have a centralized plant. What this really has come to now is because of those requirements for large developments to incorporate on-site water systems, we think there's limited value to maintaining the dual plumbing requirements set forth by the Recycled Water Ordinance and to continue planning for an east side centralized recycled water plant for non-potable uses. Therefore, we recommend that you rescind the Recycled Water Ordinance. One of the things that also we have in place is a non-potable grant program where buildings with existing dual plumbing can apply for a grant to install an on-site water system and utilize that existing plumbing. We've just added a feature to it that $100,000 would be available to projects that replace at least 450,000 gallons of potable water use per year. This is in addition to our $250,000 grants and $500,000 grants to replace 1 million gallons per year or 3 million gallons per year, respectively. And Salesforce Tower is a good example of having got a small grant relative certainly to the cost of the building to install an on-site black water system. And they're using existing dual plumbing to meet non-potable demands. There are additional opportunities for use out there I want to make sure that folks are aware of, that we're not stopping here with recycled water. We're turning our focus to study potable reuse to produce purified water. It's produced from recycled water using advanced purification treatment processes, and many utilities in California are already considering purified water. For us, we're actually doing a research project at 525 Golden Gate, our headquarters. What we're trying to do there is actually test real-time monitoring so that we can collect data and understand the potential for purified water at a building scale. So we're using additional advanced treatment on our existing system and then returning that treated water for toilet flushing. But I will say for myself, I plan on actually having a pitcher on my desk that I can offer water for anybody who cares to taste it. We're also examining the feasibility of centralized purified water. We're in Bay Area partnerships with other water and wastewater agencies to do so. One of the things we're actually studying is the feasibility of surface water augmentation in Crystal Springs Reservoir. This is not something we're going to do tomorrow, but we think in terms of climate change and the propensity for droughts in the future, we need to be looking at every possibility out there. We're also doing feasibility studies with the Santa Clara Valley Water District in their area and the Alameda County Water District in their area. So the pending action is to rescind the Recycled Water Ordinance. We're here at the Land Use Committee hearing in July, pending approval by the Board of Supervisors and the Mayor, and legislation would take effect in October. So the elimination of dual plumbing requirements will apply to development projects in any stage of planning, permit approval, or construction. And I would be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. I guess I will have to go and seek you out for a meeting so I could see that picture on your desk.
Appropriately labeled, but certainly enjoyable.
So I think that what the PUC is doing here makes absolute sense. I think that the 2015 ordinance that was passed by this board was a good one. Compared to the 1991 ordinance that was originally in place, there's a difference in terms of what is required for different size buildings. So, for example, the 1991 ordinance applies to new remodeled buildings over 40,000 square feet, as well as new and existing irrigation over 10,000 square feet. But the 2015 ordinance, sponsored by, I believe it was Supervisor Wiener at that time, applies to new development projects that are 250,000 square feet or greater. And so can you just describe for us kind of what we might be potentially missing out on as a result of just relying on the 2015 ordinance?
Yes, we did meet with the planning department and look at their pipeline report, and there are currently 9 projects that are smaller than 250,000 square feet or greater than 40,000 square feet. So the ordinance would miss those. On the other hand, that is something they could do, where we would potentially provide a grant for them to be able to do dual plumbing and treatment plant in a facility.
Okay, so those 9 projects, you're actually trying to help them.
Well, that's what the grant could go for.
Okay. My understanding was that those 9 projects potentially fall under projects sponsored under Mayor's Office of Housing. I don't know if that's the case.
Yeah,
and if you
we're
can
looking
confirm
into that. We're not aware that any are, but we're double checking with them to find out if any are. Certainly, Mayor's Office of Housing, if they did not have to dual plumb, that would be a cost savings that we would be happy to make sure happened.
Mm-hmm. Okay, because certainly, again, I think, again, this totally makes sense. We want to make sure that, especially if there are city projects that we are partnering with nonprofit developers on for, say, 100% affordable housing or so forth, that we certainly wouldn't want this to be a hindrance to development of those projects. But I think, again, moving forward, having this apply to developments of 250,000 square feet or greater is a good one. Colleagues, any questions or comments on this particular item? Okay, well, thank you very much. And all right, we'll open up item 6 to public comment then. Any members of the public who wish to speak, come on up. Okay, seeing none, public comment is closed. All right, colleagues, can we get a motion on item 6? Send this forward to the full board with positive recommendation.
So move with recommendation to the full board.
Okay, thank you, and we'll do that without objection. All right, thank you. And we will now go back to item 5.
Thank you so much, Chair Tang, for the additional time. And my apologies for my confusion. We are making all 3 of those amendments and committee today. And so I passed out copies to committee members, and we'll have a copy for the clerk too, that incorporates the 3 recommendations made by Planning Commission, one on the height and making that consistent throughout the district. The second, to replace habitable buildings with structures, because there is no definition of habitable. And then second, to ensure that this is on any parcel that contains only a surface parking lot and no existing structures, so that we won't distinguish between parcels where there are parking lots that didn't get permits, which exists in the south of Market. So I'm going to make a motion to amend this item as articulated.
Okay. Thank you, Supervisor Kim. And questions, comments on the amendments? Nope. Okay. So we'll take those amendments without objection.
And I'd like to move this item with positive recommendation to the full board.
As amended.
As amendment.
Okay. And is this item for a committee report or no? Let's see. No. Okay. All right. So we will do that without objection. Send this forward to the full board with positive recommendation as amended. All right. Thank you very much. And Mr. Clerk, are there any other further items before us today?
There is no further business.
Great. We are adjourned.